Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. Today's guest's work has been seen in 48 states and on 5 continents. She has been nominated for the Primus, Blackburn, and Laura Pels prizes and is a 3-time winner of the Emmanuel Fried Award for Outstanding New Play for Seeds, Sons and Lovers, and Once in My Lifetime. She has also twice received individual artist awards from the New York State Council on the Arts to develop Hearts of Stone and Canal Side. She has been serving the Dramatists Guild in various capacities since 2012, is an ensemble playwright at Road Less Traveled Productions, and is former moderator of the 13,500 plus member Official Playwrights of Facebook. Other plays include brilliant works of art, Elevator Girl, Safe, and Teach. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Donna Hoke.
Hi, I thought I had time to have a sip of tea.
That's okay. Feel free to sip it throughout this interview. I usually have a cup of coffee by my side, but I drank it before we started, so I will be sans coffee myself. Thanks for doing this. It's funny because I don't know if you've been aware of me, but I've been aware of you since the Official Playwrights of Facebook when I was doing the Play Noir festivals from 2012 to 2018. It was a film noir styled one-act festival that we used to post submissions for on Official Playwrights at Facebook. Can we talk about that? I think I'm going to start there because that's where I first recognized your name from, and have been wanting to get you on ever since I started this. So talk about experience. Did you start the Official Playwrights at Facebook, or did you you only moderating?
Dusty started it, and his last name is escaping me. He started it, but he kind of fell off really being involved. And I was just really involved in posting all the time. And a lot of people thought it was my thing because I posted so much. And when Dusty Wilson, I think, and then when he decided he just really couldn't do it anymore, he asked me if I would take over. So I took over, and I did it for about 5 years, but it just started to be, and I will say, like, honestly, the big thing that never occurred to me because I didn't know anything about administrating Facebook groups is that you could look at posts before you approve them. So it was a place where you could just post, and then after the fact, like, people would say, oh, this is a terrible post and this never should have gone up. And I didn't know that was an option because I had never administered a Facebook group before. So at the time, it was just getting kind of volatile, and I didn't know what to do about it. And I was just ready to shut down the whole page. And I thought maybe it's just time for me to step back and let some other people run it. And they implemented that change, which has made all the difference. And I wish I had been aware that that was something, because inevitably when I would go away on vacation or something, I would get texts from people like, oh, this thing is blowing up. And just, I didn't know that was a thing you could do. So it's still there. It's a great page. It's a great place for new playwrights to go. There's a lot of wisdom there. A lot of people who are still there dispensing a lot of advice. A lot of opportunities get posted there. It's still very supportive of the page. I'm glad that I didn't blow it up when things got messy. But I also wish I had known that that was a function that, and a thing that the administrators could do.
Sure. But I mean, it's a playwriting page. How much volatility could there be, or
there could be. There was.
People
would get nasty and hateful, and or post something incendiary, and by the time I found out that it was there, it was too late to stop the comments, and then you try to intervene, but that makes things worse. And I think now the idea is anything that could be the least bit controversial just never sees the light of day at all. And that has calmed down the page considerably.
Outside of that, about that learning experience specifically, was there anything that moderating that for 5 years that you actually walked away from that benefited your personal playwriting?
My playwriting? No. I think, something that I learned from that and from Facebook in general is that it's okay to let someone have the last word. And I think if more people would let people just have the last word instead of thinking they needed to continue, the world would be a better place.
Sure.
But that's a Facebook lesson in general that I think people could benefit from.
What was the most common thing that you saw posted? For me, the one thing that, and it kind of, I don't want to say it got old or it really kind of started like turning me off or getting my nerves, but it seemed to be a place to vent about about how many rejections people. Oh, I got my third rejection letter today. And
it still is that. It was more, it's really probably been about 4 years since I moderated it, and I don't visit it nearly as much, obviously. It was more about people thinking they could be writing certain things, and people like that kind of stuff. It was a lot. There were a lot of racial issues, a lot of people causing harm without realizing it, and being called out and then getting defensive, and a lot of that kind of stuff. And now I think that those posts just never show up, basically.
Sure.
Which is, a better way of handling it. But, since then, another page has started called the Playwrights of Facebook. I mean, the official Playwrights of Facebook, Dusty will tell you, was never meant to be anything serious. I think he was just being goofy. But now there is just a Playwrights of Facebook, which serves much of the same purposes.
Sure.
And they're actually, in the aftermath, there have been tons of other, it's very nichified now, all the different playwriting groups on Facebook, but Official Playwrights is still a pretty solid place to go for advice and anything you want to discuss. But I do feel it tends to be a little more beginner based. Like, you have a lot of people jumping in and offering advice,
right?
But there tend to be a lot of questions. I think a lot of new people find their way there. Even though all the old people are still around and being great about giving advice and talking to people and sharing everything that they know.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reason why I started this, is because there's so much information out there. There's no right way or wrong way, and everybody's got their own individual approach to it. There's tons of books out there on playwriting, but I can't glean from one way or another what's right. Especially from a book. I'm like, I can read it and kind of take some things in, but I don't know whether or not I'm doing anything correctly.
And sometimes you just need to have a conversation, and so it's really nice to be able to go there and talk to thousands of playwrights. And there's everybody on there, from the new to like Larissa Fasthorse, who jumps in all the time and talks to people and gives advice. And I think that's great. And I don't know that there's another group on Facebook that has that breadth.
Sure.
And that's what I still love about the page.
Right. Where did you get your start? Because I was going through your New Play Exchange account, and usually that's my go-to when I'm doing the research as far as the bios and stuff go.
Oh, sure.
And this is I'm in my third season right now of this podcast, and I would have to say I don't think anybody has the pedigree of plays that you do under your belt. So before we get into,
a lot of people do.
Not that let's put it this way, not that I've interviewed yet. Okay. So where did you get your start in playwriting?
It's really kind of a backwards and a strange story, because I have no theater background at all. I have no theater degree. I never had attended theater. I think when I was young, I maybe went to see Annie, like at a touring show in Buffalo. I never saw anything, maybe a high school play. And when I was living in New Jersey, my ex-husband started getting involved in some community theater. So I went to see him in a bunch of shows, and I kind of liked going. And then we got divorced and we moved to Buffalo, or I moved to Buffalo with the kids. And as a way to kind of get involved, I thought, maybe I'd check out theater. Somebody I had dated mentioned theater to me, and I was like, oh, I liked going. And there's parking as opposed to like going into New York or whatever. So there was a theater called Road Less Traveled Productions, and there was a big article in the paper about them. And they talked about their mission being world premieres by Western New York playwrights and getting younger people into theater. And I thought, that sounds good. So I bought a subscription to that theater, and I went to all 4 shows that season. And at that time, their mission of world premiere plays by Western New York playwrights was literally their entire season was world premiere plays by Western New York playwrights.
Wow.
And nobody was at most of them. Like, it was very poorly attended. And I saw in their program that they had a playwrights workshop, and that's where they were getting the plays that they were putting on stage. And I was always a writer. I have a journalism background, and I had worked for magazines, and I was a freelancer at the time I came to Buffalo. So I thought it might be fun to write a play, and like it would get produced, and how fun would that be? So I wrote a play, and it was great. Like, it was kind of, I really enjoy doing this. And I finished this long thing. Like, I had never finished a long work like that before. And I had written a children's book, was like the longest thing I had ever done. And I submitted it to the workshop and it got in, and they didn't produce that play. But that same year, two things happened. One, a ton of people had the same idea. So there were 10 people in the workshop and not just the 4 who had made up the previous season. And also the artistic director had decided that world premiere plays by Western New York playwrights would not sustain a theater. So after that, he started choosing one play from the workshop per season to produce, and he expanded his offerings. And so that first play I wrote did not get produced, but a play that I had in the workshop the next year, they did produce, and that became my first production in 2010, and that was The Couple Next Door.
So, all right, so you've got this journalism background. One, how did journalism help your playwriting? And then 2, how did you just bust out with, I mean, how did you know the structure and the form and knowing what makes a play?
I didn't really. I mean, it was a lot of instinct, and I think journalism, you learn how to tell a story. I mean, I did a lot of feature writing. I wasn't really a news person. I worked for magazines. So you learn how to tell a story, and a story is going to have a beginning, a middle, and end in the same way. I mean, obviously you're not, building stakes and that sort of thing, but you are trying to come full circle. And you also learn to be concise, and you learn how to take information and choose the best information. So I always say I'm a playwright who always writes too little and needs to add, whereas so many write too much and have to take away. So I feel like the bare bones of my plays were always pretty solid. It was always, where do I need to add, and then I needed to learn after that, how to build stakes and things. But my first few plays were really just on instinct. We've all seen so many stories. And I think when you're writing in journalism and you're doing that kind of thing, so much of it was just instinctive. And I got better at the parts that weren't instinctive, which, namely stakes, things like that. But I think in terms of knowing where it was supposed to go and that there was supposed to be a peak thing that happened, that kind of just came without really thinking too hard about it.
I'm assuming that the Road Less Traveled Productions, that it's still going on.
Yes, I've had 4 plays produced there now.
Okay,
and I'm an ensemble member there as well. Okay,
and I'm assuming that it sprung back in this new formula, kind of turned it around.
Once they started, they don't really do much new work at all anymore. But they're celebrating their 20th anniversary this year. February 3rd is big 20th anniversary party, and they've moved into several different theaters, and they just built a brand new theater right before COVID hit, and they're doing great. But no, they do not do exclusively new work by Western New York playwrights anymore.
What's the difference besides the parking of working in this huge market or maybe theater in Manhattan opposed to theater in a smaller market like Buffalo?
I mean, I always like to tell people, own your hometown. That's where you need to be known the best, because that's, theater is completely a business of relationships. We all know that. As hard as it is to accept, that's really what it comes down to. And you're going to have the best relationships in the place where you live. And even New York City, I say that is, while the opportunities are greater there, at the end of the day, it still comes down to having to know all the people who make those opportunities happen. So that's the same anywhere. All New York City playwrights are trying to do is own their hometown. It's just bigger and harder to do, but the rewards are greater if you're able to do it. It's the same thing in smaller towns. You really, you have to go to theater in your town. You have to go to everything. I mean, I started going to a ton of theater after I wrote that first play. And by going to a ton of theater, I kept running into the same people all the time. And then I started getting invited to opening nights. And then when I started getting invited to opening nights, I got invited to be on the awards committee in Buffalo, the Artie committee, which then got me free tickets to every single show because I was now a voter for that. And the more people you get to know, and the more you're just part of the community. And it's not like I'm showing up with a play and asking you for something. I mean, I have a production coming up at the end of this month at Theater of Youth. I mean, I've been here now since 2004, but didn't have that first production until 2010. So we're basically talking 13 years. I never asked Theater of Youth for anything, but I went to every single show they ever did. But I have Anne of Green Gables published now. And I went to them and said, hey, if you want to produce Anne of Green Gables, I'd be happy to come and do talkbacks or whatever else you need in terms of support. And they're doing it. And they're not necessarily doing it because it's me, but they know me. They read the play. They liked it. It's published. And, in 13 years, I never asked them for anything. But when you're part of the community, it's okay to make that ask. And it's okay if they say no, because sometimes people do. But I think that's it's easier in a smaller place, obviously, because the stakes aren't as large as it is in New York City, and you're not talking about people investing as much. But the more you are just part of the ecosystem already, the easier it is to make those asks and not have people feel like, you're just asking for something and that's all you want from them.
I think there's a huge give and take in that regard. I had an episode that we recorded last night that will have aired before this one, and it was more in the stand-up community, but it was kind of the same thing. It's like you just don't go, and there's a manager, you don't go just approach them and say, "Hey, I've got this thing." You have to build those relationships first. And I think a lot of people that, I'm in LA, and and it's that whole Hollywood mentality. It's like, well, what can you do for me? It's like you can't. It's not a good mentality to have. You have to have this, like, build the relationship. The relationship's the most important thing. And if something comes out of it, great. But if something doesn't, then no.
And it can't even just be because you think someday I'm going to want something, because you can't just be marking time in that way.
100%.
And by being a part of the community where I go to every single show, I know all the actors. If I want to do a reading, I can invite actors to my house. And when you're part of it, it doesn't feel like you're asking for something, because you've been giving back constantly.
Sure.
And, so I always tell people that, because you're going to have the best, my best theater production experiences have been in my own town too, because you can be so closely involved. You can go to all the rehearsals, who you're casting, if they're right for your show. And if people see them and like them, then that only helps you build your reputation, and it just keeps growing on itself. I actually did a blog post chronicling. It was an Own Your Own Hometown blog post chronicling the steps that happened, and not that I was, marking them or calculating them, but the number of theaters that I've worked with here and how that happened over time, just by virtue of momentum and putting in the time and just being part of the community. And that putting in the time sounds bad, because I don't mean it that way, but just being in the community for that length of time.
I don't think putting in the time sounds bad at all. I think you have to. I think it's unrealistic to come in and think that you're just going to make this happen. I have a dear friend who moved back to LA, and he's like, it's so great that when I booked that series regular job, I'm like, dude, you just got here. I have friends that have been here for 20 plus years that are much more talented than you are. It doesn't work that way. And I think you just have to be realistic about it. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I do think you have to do your time.
And it's the easiest to do where you live. That's really the point that I continue to make. And so for people in New York, that's where they live. It's the easiest to do there. It's just harder there. Because, the number of what I like to call career aspirational playwrights in Buffalo is not that large. And by that, I guess I would define that as, people who seek productions outside of Buffalo, who have had productions outside of Buffalo. There aren't that many of us. So it makes it a little easier, but it still takes a long time to get people to trust you, particularly if they're theaters who don't normally do new work. Like Theater of Youth doesn't really do new plays per se. So if you're trying to approach a theater with an idea and they don't normally do that, that's where the relationships really come into play.
You mentioned being involved. How involved do you get? Are you there for casting? Are you there for, for rehearsals? Are you there to answer questions? And how do you kind of deflect that over to the director? Because that's,
If it's the first production of a play, I'm definitely involved. I have done everything. Like Anne of Green Gables, I'm not super involved because it's published. I was involved in casting because I know as many actors as the director, and us working together, I think was a good thing, but I haven't been to a rehearsal yet, and it opens January 24th. I intend to pop in, but because it's a published play, I feel like it's kind of not my place to be there. But if it's the first production of a play and I'm still figuring the play out and I don't know how things are going to work on stage, and Anne is like a special case too, because it had a lot of school productions and I didn't see one until a year ago. And when I saw it, it's like, I really should have done this scene this way. So I gave that, I have that script and I gave that to her, but that's all I did. I've actually produced a play of my own here with somebody else's money. It was a commission and they commissioned me to write it, but they live in San Jose. And he wasn't going to be in town until close to opening. So I produced it, but with his money. So I've done every stretch of it. If it's the very first production of a play, I will be at all the rehearsals up until the blocking's done. And then I disappear for a while and let people get comfortable. And then I come back kind of near the end.
Talk about that commission. How'd that come about, and what was the process of getting that on stage?
So this guy was originally from Buffalo, and he had this idea that somebody should write a play about in which, I guess, the Buffalo Bills win the Super Bowl. And I don't know how familiar you are with Buffalo Bills history. But
I root for them.
They went 4 years in a row and lost, and had not been to the playoffs in 17 years at the time that he approached me to write this play. And he had the idea. He thought it was a great idea. He tried to do it himself. He's not a playwright. And here's another thing. He just Googled me and found my name all over Buffalo Playwriting and contacted me. And I'm like, yeah, I can write that play. And I did. And honestly, to date, it is my favorite theatrical experience ever. It was so fun because people came who had never stepped foot in a theater before. We got so much publicity. You can't possibly imagine the publicity we had. And people came dressed in Bill's regalia, and they didn't even know what they were getting into. Like, they'd never seen a play. And there's a moment in the play where the Bills finally win, and all the cast just kind of stops cold with their mouths hanging open. And somebody in the audience literally said to them, they won. Like, they thought they had to explain to them, like, what had happened. They didn't get that it was scripted, like that kind of stuff. We sold VIP seats in the front. The only lament is that the guy who produced it didn't really get how theater worked. I don't know why he wanted it to be a play, but he didn't book the theater for long enough. And so we had to cut some of our performances for tech, and then we had to like try and cram in. But we did, and then we had I wrote in a spot for a guest cameo every night, and he actually got Scott Norwood, who was the guy who missed the kick in that first Super Bowl, to come and do the guest cameo. He got awesome. A huge standing ovation. It was incredible. It was incredible. We still talk about it. I keep saying if the Bills make the playoffs, which I guess they're going to after today, and go down in flames, we really should revisit it. I can rewrite all the stuff that's no longer timely, and it would be a lot of fun. It was so much fun.
Well, hey, why does it have to be now? Why can this not be an annual endeavor and just?
Well, I don't think the producer wants to produce it annually, and I don't have the money to produce it annually. But I would love someone else to do it. I think, like, the Bills have kind of, like, this was in 2018, so we're 6 years ago now that we did it, and we could still do it again tomorrow if I updated it, and it would be just because we still haven't gotten there.
So because I mean, I'm listening to this, and like, there's so many different approaches that you can take this from. Are you taking it from a fan place? Are you taking it from a broadcasting place? Are you taking it from the player's place? Are you tackling, no pun intended, all the different? This is amazing. I have to read this. I cannot wait. So are you taking it from all different factions and perspectives, or is it like from a family's point of view?
It's so the basic premise is there's a backer bar called Miracle. And the owner of the bar wants to leave Buffalo. She wants to go to Florida, be with her grandkids. They live down there, but she promised her husband when he died that, her husband's best friend told her, because they were in a car accident, the best friend told her that he made the friend promise to keep the bar open until the Bills win. So win the Super Bowl. So there's a cast of characters in the bar. They all have very specific personal reason, like how their lives will change if only the Bills would win. So the way they win, obviously, is some, crazy fantasy thing. But they all are able to move forward and make those changes. But it's a comedy. And, it's got a lot of fun Bills reference stuff. And yeah, it was a really good, I can send you clips. I have clips awesome. Of the win and the Scott Norwood thing, and yeah, it was fun.
On that note, before I forget, I do want, when you mentioned that blog earlier talking about dominating your hometown, I know that's not the word you use, but I would
owning. I wouldn't say I've dominated, but owning it in terms of knowing every theater in town, knowing who runs it, having had coffee with them, having talked to them about what they do with their theater, just that kind of stuff is what
I just want to make sure that I include that link in the show notes, because I think that's a great resource for people to have. And I think that's a great piece of advice. How do you keep going? I mean, like I said, you've got a litany of titles on your page. I'm like, what makes you sit down and go?
Well, right now that I'm kind of like,
Continually.
I recently moved. And so since October, I have not sat down and written a thing, because from October through mid-November, it was just like getting settled and moving and buying furniture, and then the holidays. And so now I'm in this spot where, like, oh man, I really need to sit down and get going on stuff. So I was talking to my daughter, and she's reminding me, well, you have this project and this project. So just pick one and just sit down and start doing it. And my son is outlining a novel right now. And he wrote to me and said, I just outlined the whole thing, and like all these really cool moments happened, and like I didn't even think that was going to happen. And I'm like, that's exactly it. Like, that's what keeps me from sitting down sometimes, because you forget that those things happen, and it always does. And you think, oh, that's not going to happen this time, because like you're just blocked into like sitting down and starting. So that kind of made me realize if I sit down and I just start doing it, that will happen and I will fall into it. But I just have like not been able to quite get there yet since the move. It was just a lot.
Is that the secret for you? Is it entering that flow state? Is once you sit down and start, then you continue?
Yeah. I mean, even if I like, usually I set a goal for myself when I'm in play of 3 pages a day. And once I'm in that, I can do those 3 pages every day, and it's not a problem.
Do you outline?
I don't outline.
Ever? I mean, did you start outlining and you've mastered it so much?
No,
well
I have never outlined. And interestingly, in the past 3 years, I started writing screenplays, and they almost require that you do an outline. I mean, the company that I've been working with requires an outline. So I've had to outline. And I think because plays don't adhere to a lot of the stricter structural rules that screenplays do, at least the ones I've been writing, which are for television, and they're very strictly structural.
Oh, yes.
I tend not to want to outline with a play, but I know people do. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, I don't. I mean, playwriting's not my. It's not my go-to. I mean, my forte is really screenwriting as well. But there's a few plays that I've got under my belt, kind of incomplete here and there. But I find that as I go, the ideas pop down and I'll note, but I don't necessarily outline, which I don't know. I just.
Yeah. And maybe it's more that, like, in the midst of it, I'll be like, oh, this has to happen. And then like somewhere down in my script, I'll say, this has to happen, and kind of do it that way, but not in the stricter way that I've had to do for the screenplays.
So is that your approach? We'll call it writer's block. Is that where when you get stuck, it's like, I know this has to happen here, but I got to keep going. So I'll just make a note.
Yeah.
If this has to happen, and then I'll move forward with that scene. Or do you start in the middle and work your way back?
I start at the beginning and I work my way to the end. And my document is usually a document full of notes that have accumulated as I started working on it. And usually that's the project that I will end up working on first, is the one that has the most notes. And I think, we all can write that first scene because the setup is the easiest, right? So, and then I kind of know I'm done when all those notes have been addressed, that's like, just, okay, took care of that. So I'll delete it. And then when they've all been addressed, or if it's something that's no longer relevant, then I have a first draft. I know it's a very messy way to work. It's not organized at all.
It's organized chaos is what it is.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that.
I mean, I've got notebooks and notepads all over the place that have notes and I'll forget about them and whatnot. And, and sometimes move on past something that I had started and like, oh, well, that doesn't really
start
fit
documents. Like I'll start a document in final draft with the title, a working title, and then I'll just start putting notes in that. And, so when I'm ready, like, oh, I have a chunk of time, I should really pick something. If something hasn't, been on my plate, or I need to get something done, then I'll kind of like go through what one has the most started already. And then that's usually where I'll dive in.
I don't use the notes too often in final draft, but I mean, are you using like, hey, I'm going to start, and then whatever that tool is that they've got? I don't
know how to use any of those tools. And in fact, for the screenplays, I really had to figure out how to use the tools because it's much more useful there. No, it's literally just a document with all the notes in it.
Okay. Yeah, on final draft or in a separate process?
No, final draft. And I'll just keep throwing them in there because, like when you're thinking about a project all the time, you're like, oh, that would be, and then I'll just open that and I'll throw it in there and I'll forget about it. And then if that's the play I end up working on next that has the most notes in the file, then that's the one I'll start on.
Is that like a highlighted thing or parenthetical, or how do you separate that? Or just like when you come back to it, it's like,
just
oh,
a
I
hot
forgot
mess.
that was there. I got to fix that. Fair enough.
No, I mean, and Final Draft has all those tools. I just don't know how they all work.
No, I'm not too far
Big
behind.
deal for me on Final Draft to figure out how to make the index cards into a script. That was huge. And like every time I went back, I would forget how I did it.
Right.
And I would have to figure it out again.
Yeah, and for those of you that are watching or listening, Final Draft, it's not just for screenplays. They do have a playwriting component as well in different formats and whatnot. So I want you to think we've gotten off topic in that regard. So one of the things I noticed on your new Play Exchange page was one of your newest pieces, I think, was you noted looking for world premiere. Has that helped? Has that helped you making note of that? Or I'm just curious because it was the first time I've ever seen it. But I'm just curious.
I don't think so. I don't know what play I have that on currently. Probably Mabel. I don't think it's helped necessarily. I don't think Mabel still doesn't have production, so I guess not. I don't know how much people are reading things there, but do you think that New Plays Exchange has become oversaturated? If such a thing is possible, or I mean, because there's a lot. There are a lot. I mean, I think New Play Exchange has evolved beyond the way it was originally intended to work. I think the original intention was that it was going to take over for all the play submission plays, like Playwrights Center or Play Submissions Helper or whatever, that all the opportunities were going to be there, and it was going to show you the plays that were eligible, and you were just going to tag it and it was going to be done. That was the dream, I think. That didn't really work because what would happen is people would go on, they would do that, people would run over and tag their plays, and like Kitchen Dog in Texas used to have snail mail only submissions, and they would get maybe 300. And they were an NNPN member, which is National New Play Network, which was a parent organization for NPX. So the first year they were like, well, we want to support NPX. We're an NNPN member. They put it on there and they got like 2,000 scripts digitally. And it was too much. And that became an issue, is that, if you didn't put all the parameters in right, you would get scripts that weren't right for the opportunity. And then people started saying, well, let's just take the first 300. And then it became, well, that's not really fair to people who aren't checking their email all the time, or it's just the people with the fastest trigger fingers, or if they're only taking the first 300, then people will tag and read the description later. So that didn't really quite work. And then, and also the problem with it on the theater end of not being great at filling out all the different data that they needed to fill out to narrow the pool to exactly, so only the people who had the right play and were from the right demographic would even get the email in the first place. So that was also a problem. So if you've noticed, and if you're on NPX, and anybody who is on there will have noticed, that there are far, far, far fewer opportunities that come through NPX, and almost none of them just allow you to tag your play. The ideal didn't really work in practice. And so I think what NPX has become as a result is more of a marketplace. And for people who know the exact play they want to do, or they want to read plays, or I need a two-hander with a minimal set, and it's got to be a 50-year-old white man and a 30-year-old black woman, you can go on there and you can probably find that. And I think that's kind of how it's being used most predominantly.
Sure.
I think the opportunity thing isn't working. It isn't really happening. I mean, maybe tons of opportunities are happening that I'm not eligible for, and it's working better than I think. Sure. I don't know, but I know I haven't seen a lot in the past couple of years.
Well, I would say in my experience that even having all those parameters and saying this is what we're looking for. I mean, I can't tell you when I did Play Noir, I couldn't tell you how specific I got on this is what we want, this, we want that. Here's some examples of noir. Here's some great noir movies. And more often than not, I would probably say 10 to 15% of submissions that we got were not noir in any form of
10 to 15%
of our submissions were not noir.
But 85% were?
Yes.
That's not bad.
It's not bad. And I don't know. It's been a while. It's been 5-6 years. And there were times when we get 255 submissions. I think that was the highest that we got digitally. And then I'm guessing, I mean, I don't know. But more often than not, there was always some that where I'm like, this is not noir. But that's the stickler about noir. It's like I always have to read it all the way to the end because sometimes that's what the twist is. Well, that's always what the twist is. So I'm like, well, I guess I got to keep reading because if I don't, it might be the most brilliant play ever because they've got this twist at the end that I wasn't expecting.
Right.
But
yeah, I think it just, from an opportunities perspective, I think became difficult. And unless the person on the asking end is making sure that they narrow it so that only people with the right play and only the right plays will ever get notified in the first place.
Right.
And again, I hope that's happening and they're just not my plays or me. But sure. I kind of feel like it's not maybe happening to the extent that it was originally desired. But as a marketplace, I think it's working wonderfully. The project manager, Woody Sullivan, I know in the beginning was like going out and traveling a ton and marketing to schools a lot, with the idea that all the school theater people are the future theater makers. They're going to know to use NPX. They're going to know to shop on NPX. And I do get requests via NPX from schools. A lot of times for short plays or from students for monologues, or I want to direct this piece in my director's class. So I know schools are still using it, but Gwydion has a new job now that keeps him pretty busy, and I don't think he's doing any of that marketing anymore. So I think that while NPX I think is slated for some kind of update upcoming, I don't think it's being marketed in the way it was when it first came on board. So I think it's like, it's still very active and people are still using it, but I don't know if the outreach is what it used to be.
Did you find that? Sure. Okay. Did you find that as you progress and started building more experience did you find that you needed to go do workshops, or did you just kind of teach yourself? And was there any resource out there that you found like, okay, wow, all right, I learned something from this. This was really beneficial.
I mean, I see probably 100 plays a year. That's my theater education. The more plays you see, the more you see what other people are doing, the more you like, oh, I like that. I want to try that, or let me borrow that. I think that helps even more than reading a lot of plays, because when you see it, you can imagine what it looked like on the page. I loved that pre-pandemic, there were a lot of conferences you could go to that you didn't have to be accepted into. Kenyon Playwrights Conference was wonderful. I went there 3 or 4 years in a row, and I thought it was terrific. It was just all these playwrights, and you took classes all day, and you listened to people's work at night, but there was a lot of time for socializing. I'm still friends with some of the people that I met there. And there was also City Rights Conference, which was wonderful, and that's gone now. And it seems like there are so few left that are not the variety that you need to get accepted into. And I miss those. I found those helpful. I do have a shelf full of books, and I've read them, and sometimes I would reread them. The one that I probably still use the most is the Dramatists Companion. Is that what it's called? It's kind of a troubleshooting book. Like you go through and like, my villain's not likable enough, or not understandable, whatever. Like my villain is too one note, or whatever it is. And then there's a series of exercises that you do to address like a specific problem. So if you're in your writers group and people are all giving you the same note and it's about whatever, you can find it in the book, and then there will be several pages of exercises. And by the time you're done with them, the idea is that you can fix that thing. And I find that book to be amazing. But the how-to books I haven't probably pulled out in a while.
Okay. All right.
I want to say one more thing about NPX. Sure. 2 of the productions I got in 2023 were from NPX. So I just wanted to say that in terms of how people are still using it to shop.
Where are you looking for your opportunities then on that note, besides NPX?
It's tough out there right now. I mean, I think that Trenches Playwrights, the ones who get most of their productions by submitting things, will all tell you that it's a little rough out there right now. The number of submissions that I make in a year, and in 2015, when Dramatists Guild had their conference in La Jolla, I introduced a submission seminar out there that has since propagated in many forms. Tons of other people have offered the same thing, and the same information is being disseminated. And we kind of have taught playwrights how to submit in a way that they never really did before, unless they were figuring out on their own. And in the wake of that, there also became tons of opportunity sharing and Play Submissions Helper. And so everybody is submitting to a lot of the same opportunities. So on one hand, we've kind of broken a lot of opportunities. A lot of people are like, well, we can't handle this many scripts.
Right.
And on the other hand, COVID happened and there are fewer
Yeah.
opportunities, and theaters are scaling back and they're not doing as much new work. So whereas in 2018, I was submitting to five or 600 things a year, in 2023, I think I was at 121. That's kind of where we've come. Things that I was eligible to submit for. And of course, like, things are becoming much more nichified demographically, and there are a lot of things I'm not eligible to submit for. But even to fall that much, that's more of a trend than,
Sure.
me being, a white woman who can't submit to XYZ. I think it's an overall trend. I mean, any playwrights I talk to are kind of experiencing the same thing.
What does your submission look like? I mean, what do you include? So
whatever they ask for.
Okay.
I mean, a 10-minute submission is usually just attach, please find X to consider for your X festival. Thank you for the opportunity, my name, and attach the play. If they ask for other things, as like there was an NPX opportunity last week that wanted a whole separate document. And this is a way to help people do some more conscientious submitting, right? Like, you can't just tag the play. You have to create this document and include this information. And that's hopefully slows people down enough to say, like, am I submitting a play that's actually right for this theater? Because what they literally ask you, why is your play right for us? So you have to then go and check out the theater if you're not familiar with it and see what kind of work they produce. And you can't just click a button, which, was probably always a recipe for disaster.
Are there any requirements that you've come across that you just think, well, that's a little absurd and unnecessary?
I'm not a huge fan of the artist statement. I think I don't know that an artist statement has ever gotten me an opportunity. And I always kind of feel like, if you like the play, what does it matter why I wrote this play?
Sure. Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel that way. They're time consuming. And I feel like they're more important for maybe like Playwrights Center, the core writers, right? Where you're looking for someone who's going to be developing work there over 3 years, as opposed to for a production opportunity. Like, if you're looking for someone who's going to be developing work there for 3 years, then you really want to know where they're coming from, what kind of work they're doing, what they're looking to do there, how they're going to use the resources in the community. That's much different than, like, we're looking for our season. Then what does it matter? You're going to, put up this play. But I see fewer of those lately, which I think is a good thing.
Sure.
I don't love those. I don't mind saying what my goals are for the play, because I feel like that shows a level of awareness about your writing that they want to see. So if you're sending to the O'Neill and they're like, how is this time here going to help you? And if you can talk about your play in a way that shows what its weaknesses are and how they're going to help you address those weaknesses, I think that's valuable. But the artist statement, the overall thing, I'm not a huge fan
of. What's your experience with the O'Neill?
I've been a finalist twice, been a semifinalist twice. I'm a semifinalist right now. I hope I can say that. I've never been, so that's my experience.
But yeah, still getting to those what's the accolades, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's still,
Yeah, I mean, it's validating. Like, whenever I send out a new play, like the first time it gets some kind of hit or nibble, I'm like, okay, I have something here. And I have plays that have never gotten that. Like, I'll send it out. It's like, wow, that was just a big fat nothing. So I guess that's just not a great play. Like, when you write it, you don't really know until you kind of send it out and see how people respond to it.
I touched on rejection earlier. Do you still deal with rejection at all? And if so, how do you approach it, or how do you get by it, or does it still bother you at all, or is it just
it never, I mean, I used to send out so many things that, I was getting rejections every day, but also getting acceptances, because, it's a numbers game in the end. I mean, for people in the trenches who are submitting and don't have the relationships that are going to get their plays produced in that way. Yeah, I mean, I very much operate on a submit and forget model. I mean, I do make a note of it on a file that I have, like what I sent and where I sent it and what date I sent it, but then I don't think about it. I don't watch, like, we're announcing on this date, and then I'm checking that website. There's too much stuff out in the universe to do that.
Do you expect a response on whether or not on whether or not your play got in or not?
If it's something like the O'Neill or like a conference like
Sure.
Seven Devils or something, yes, of course, I expect a response. Cold submissions, I never expect a response. If it's like a 10-minute play festival, I don't expect a response. They'll let me know if they chose me. Yeah, I mean, I don't really expect, it's nice to get one, but if the date passed, then I know I didn't get it.
Sure.
Or like I also will mark what I call rejection by announcement. It's like, here, these are the plays we've chosen, and it's not me, then to me that's letting me know.
All right. Is there an element of playwriting that you still struggle with?
I think coming up with ideas is my hardest thing. Just getting something that I feel strongly enough about that I want to start writing it.
Is that what it all comes down to? Any ideas that pop into your head, you have to feel strongly about them to sit down and
Yeah,
write?
I think I have to feel like it's a play that's worth writing, that I feel like people will want to read, that I feel like has enough juice to make it to the end, that is layered enough that it's not just going to be a one-note thing. Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing for me. I know there are people like, I have more ideas than I could ever do, and I don't think that's me.
Well, I mean, that's a long list of ideas that you have on your new play exchange page.
Well,
so I wish I had that many ideas.
Well, that's over like 15 years or something. So
yeah, still, that's pretty impressive. Is there an element that you struggled with you finally overcame? Whether that's character, story. Well, obviously, story was never going to be an issue for you, considering your background.
Yeah.
What stage directions?
I don't know. That I finally overcame would mean I do it right every time, and I don't think I necessarily do. I think I pay a lot more attention to stakes now than I used to. I think my earlier plays people would call, play of ideas, like that kind of thing. I think I'm better at story than I used to be.
All right. Do you have a favorite element that you really like to? That really kind of like gets you excited? That
a favorite element. I mean, I love writing dialogue, but I do struggle, with the whole everyone should sound different thing. I think we all struggle a little bit with that,
right. Sure.
Without going over the top. Like, oh, well, they're all going to have a different accent or something.
Sure. Right.
I struggle with that still, even though I like writing dialogue.
Do you, I know you don't outline, but do you write out your characters? Do you give them a backstory or anything, or you just let your characters tell you who they are as you write?
Yeah, I don't give them a backstory. And that Dramatist companion book I mentioned, like some of the exercises, if you run into a snag, will be monologues to help you fill out a particular aspect of a character. But I was listening to Aaron Sorkin's masterclass. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to that one.
I haven't, but I'd like to.
I think that's the only one I listen to. My kids gave me a subscription. I listened to like 2. But I listened to his, and he talked about that. And he said, so many things will tell you that you need to create an entire backstory for every single character. And he said, I find it really distracting, because if you do that, then you're going to know everything about your character. And like, if your character loves crunchy peanut butter, your character is in a scene where they're asking their parents for money that they desperately need, and you're going to be trying to figure out a way to like put in that they love crunchy peanut butter. And I do think that there is some truth to that, because, and I felt so validated when you said that too. But also, like, when I've done those exercises in the book that I referenced, and I wrote monologues for the characters, like, the reason you're writing it is because you need information to flesh out a particular aspect of that character. So once I wrote the monologue, I was like, oh, like, this is important stuff. Like, I need to find a way. So I definitely would fall prey to that. And I think a lot of people probably do. And I think character is super important, but I think getting the story down first is a little more important, because you can always go back and you will figure out your characters along the way too, because of their relationships to the other people in the story.
Well, I think that that's the important thing. I think that if you take the backstory aspect of character, that crunchy peanut butter does not a character make, it's their behavior. And I think that's where a lot of, beginning playwrights have it, they kind of get off the wrong foot of what character is. It's not that limp and stutter and, whatever. It's really how they behave under certain circumstances. you know, and I think that that's some aspects that they forget.
Yeah. And if they have a limp, how did they get it? And how does that affect them still? You know,
Yeah.
like that, more that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Have you ever, if you did that exercise where it's like, okay, I got to write this monologue to get some, you know, backstory or get some elements of this character. Have you ever like, oh, this is actually pretty good. I'm going to put this in the, I'm going to put this in the play. Okay. Not always though.
And I've also had the experience like where I had a play I was working on, and I wrote a scene for the director about how two of the main characters met. And I loved that scene so much. And I wanted to put it in the play in some way. And I was like, oh man, can it be a flashback? But there just wasn't any way to do that. You know, it was just an important scene for me to write. So I knew how those characters met. And I was able to kind of infuse the characters with the knowledge of that's how they met, but I could not find a place for that scene. Well,
let me pick your brain about that then. Could that essentially be a standalone scene for in a scene book or anything? Or is there something missing to where there isn't necessarily a beginning, middle, and an end to where it's a great scene if it was in the play, but it really doesn't work as a standalone for something else?
I mean, it could be a great work scene if there were ever need for something like that. But it was more to give myself and the director information about these two characters. But there just wasn't a way to put it in the play. It just didn't have it because it took place years before the play happened, and it didn't really inform the current story. It was really just about helping to flesh out those characters.
Well, it just seems too bad that you still can't find a use for it somewhere outside the play itself, where it's just, I think, you know, why not? You know, I think there always is always a use for, you know, those scenes and monologues.
I don't know. Maybe I should just take it and start something new with it and see where it goes.
Yeah, maybe. You know? I say throw it in a scene book. That's my take. How is have you been able to see or track how your playwriting has evolved? What over time from the beginning till now?
I mean, I had that first production in 2010, and it was a full-length play, so that was, you know, kind of a heady start. And then I discovered 10-minute plays very soon after that. And I spent an entire year writing 10-minute plays. I was so enamored of 10-minute plays. And I started sending them out. And by sending them out, I started getting acceptances for all those 10-minute plays. And that was the thing that kind of kept me going and let me know, because the first play was produced locally. So, you know, I didn't feel like I had the competition of the world, but sending out 10s and then they were getting accepted. I'm like, okay, I must be doing something right. So that really helped give me energy to move forward. Like I'm doing something right, or these wouldn't be accepted. And it was actually sending a 10 to somewhere that got me my second full length production. So it took 3 years from the first full length production to the second. So that was definitely an evolution. And then after that, I was like, started getting accepting in readings, and I was, you know, probably getting like 8 to 10 productions a year just through submissions alone up until, you know, like the past year. So yeah, I could track the evolution that way, or just, you know, making finalist for a lot of things and that kind of stuff.
Is it a numbers game?
I think if you're a playwright who submits the way I do, it's a numbers game. Like if you talk to, like I was on the awards committee for the Dramatists Guild one season, and it was very interesting to hear all these New York playwrights talk about their careers, because the way they kind of are doing it is, you know, they have relationships. They're all building toward this one huge production that's going to be off Broadway and hopefully move to Broadway and, you know, whatever. And they were very puzzled by the life of kind of a playwright who lives in the regions and is submitting and is getting, you know, 10 to 12 productions a year, but they're small, because that's not how they operate at all. So it was really interesting to see like their kind of general confusion, you know, and these are fairly known playwrights, a lot of them in the room, to hear that that's how so many playwrights are operating, because that is not their world. So for us, yes, it's absolutely a numbers game. For people who, you know, are in the New York playwright culture, it's a completely different thing. It's about raising money. It's about getting this production here. It's, you know, and hoping to get it into a big theater in New York that will then get it published, and then it will go out to the regions, you know, that route, as opposed to we're sending and hoping to get accepted somewhere.
I'm trying not to read into that too much, where because I'm hearing it and I'm like, that sounds kind of like coming from a place of expectation, like I of being of deserving, because I'm here and all I have to do is raise the money.
It's not so much that as just playwrights who enter via a different path. I mean, I started writing playwrights a little later. I didn't go to school for playwriting, so I think when you go to school at a big school for playwriting, you're just taught a different path in a lot of ways. And if you're a playwright who ends up on a path that gives you a fair amount of success, as opposed to all the rest of the playwrights at those fancy schools who didn't end up on that path, and there are many who are now in the trenches submitting and doing all those same things. Does that make sense? But the people But the people who are on this committee, like one of the people in the room actually said, well, you can kind of live on prize money for a while, right?
Right.
Most playwrights, 98% of them aren't winning prize money with any kind of regularity, or the big prize money. So it just is a different perception. So I think for playwrights who are not known by name for the most part, and we're sending, it is largely a numbers game. And of course, the plays have to be marketable, and they have to be plays that people want to produce. But assuming that they are, then yes, it's a numbers game, I think. But that's been my only experience. For me, it's 100% a numbers game.
Sure. But I mean, I guess I don't know.
And the relationships, as we talked about earlier,
no, of course. But I'm listening, and like, at what point do you have to take a step back and maybe reevaluate your work and realize that, well, if these opportunities aren't appearing,
well,
maybe you have to take, reevaluate your work.
Yeah, that we don't really talk about, right? Like, that's assuming all plays are equal. Right. So if you're sending, I always tell people, and I have a blog post about this too, like, you should be writing 10-minute plays. Why should you be writing 10-minute plays? Lots of reasons. But one of the most important ones, I think, is that when you write 10-minute plays, you're not competing with anybody but your peers. Like, really, because nobody famous is writing 10-minute plays. They are not sending them to 10-minute play festivals. So you're competing with only your peers. And most of those 10-minute play opportunities have a timestamp on them. So when you send it, it's like, we're going to be having our festival in 4 months or 6 months. And so you will get an answer. You will get some feedback. Whereas full-length plays, like, maybe you're sending them and like you never hear anything, and now there are so few like places to even send them, but you're always going to get a feedback loop with the 10-minute plays. So if you are sending out 50 to 60 10-minute plays and you're not hearing anything, then yes, like, you're probably going to need to reevaluate. Because if you can't write a solid 10-minute play, then you probably can't write a solid scene, which is the building block of the full-length play. So yes, I think it's a great evaluation mechanism, because if you're writing a good 10-minute, somebody's going to accept it. If you send it to 60 places, somebody's going to want that play if it's good, right? So yeah, I do say at that point, if you're not hearing anything, if you're not getting any nibbles, and you're sending, maybe it's time to step back and look at the work.
Right. And that's what, going back, and not to pick on anybody on official Playwrights of Facebook, but I think that's, I think there was that same person who kept posting about his rejection, and I'm like, maybe it's not them, man.
Yeah. And, it is hard to talk about that, because, in general, art is so subjective, that,
sure.
And, sometimes I'll read a play and I'll be like, I don't think that was a very good play. And somebody will produce that play. So it's really hard to say, which is why then it really is a numbers game. Because if the play is good on some level and you send it to that many places, you're going to hear something from one of them, right? Like, you're probably going to hear something. If it's rising to the top 10%, which is what's going to get chosen, and over the course of 60 to 100 submissions, it's got to rise to that top 10% at least once if it's good, even if subjectively somebody else doesn't like it.
Right. Is there a correct structure when it comes to a 10-minute play? Except for the fact, besides the fact that I will say,
if you're writing 10-minute plays now, write comedies. Don't write dramas. You have a much better chance. Because that's just kind of the way it's gone. My most produced 10-minute play is a drama. It's been produced, I don't know, maybe 70 times, something like that. It's a drama. I think it's a good 10-minute play. And I've sent it out to things recently, and it doesn't really get chosen anymore. But I look at the lists of things that are chosen, and I know who those writers are, and I know they write comedies. And I think people, a lot of the theaters who do 10-minute play festivals, they do them as moneymakers. You know, you can cast a lot of people, and the comedies just seem to do better. And that's an evolution I've seen take place in the past decade. You know, where it's really like, so I stopped writing 10-minute dramas, actually. Like, I haven't written 10-minute plays in a while, which I think is kind of another natural evolution. When you start to work more on full lengths, you just don't have time for the 10 minutes that much. But I noticed, like, in 2012, when I was spending that year writing 10-minute plays and sending them out, they were mostly dramas. And then over the next decade, it really became a more comedy dominant market. And I think, like, the writers' names who I see over and over and over, they're mostly writing comedies. Not that there's not going to be an exception somewhere, but I think you have a much better chance if you make your reader laugh. And I also think sometimes the dramas end up being a little more subtle, and somebody's reading it. And I think, you know, you also have readers who are reading hundreds of plays. So they're going through them very quickly. So if they have a laugh reaction, I think your play is automatically going to move into the next pile, as opposed to, like, I'm reading this drama and I'm not really reacting. Or, you know, I think comedies tend to be an easier read too when you're reading a lot of plays. And because the numbers are so huge now, the numbers of plays they get, the easier it is to read, I think the better off you are.
When it
That's just all conjecture, but I think that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, it's all right. When it comes to a comedic 10-minute play, is the comedy in the premise and the situation, or is it in the dialogue? Not that it can't be both, but
I think the more the better. If you can make all three, terrific. I think just because it's a comedy doesn't mean it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. I see a lot of times they're just sketches and they kind of peter out. But a lot of readers for these festivals might not even recognize this is a sketch as opposed to a play, but it made me laugh, so I'm passing it on. I think the best, you know, 10-minute plays do have a beginning, middle, and end, and don't just feel like, you know, they peter out. They're not a one-trick pony. The better ones aren't just one joke that gets repeated in multiple ways.
Right.
I think it can be a funny premise, I think, is helpful, because a funny premise will lead to funny dialogue. I mean, some of the best ones out there, Rick Park is hilarious. Mark Harvey Levine does really well with the comedies. Rich Orloff used to do a lot of 10s. Scott Mullen gets a lot of 10-minute comedies produced. I mean, those are some of the bigger names in 10-minute comedies, and you see their name. I don't even know if they're all. Mark definitely is. I don't know if Rich writes 10s anymore. Rick Park is hilarious. Probably one of the funniest 10-minute plays I've ever seen was his shark play. So yeah, if you're writing 10s, go for the comedy.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Good to know. I mean, is there? But going back to the structure, I mean, is there a specific thing? Are there specific things that have to hit under certain times? I'm sorry, because I got away with that and asked you a question in between that. So, just for people that might be just starting out as far as 10-minute plays go, though they can obviously go back to past episodes. But so obviously the first page, you got to do something in the first couple lines. I guess that's our setup. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, I mean, it's everything just shrunk. So if you have a 100-page play and you say by the end of page 10, you need to know where this play is going, what the major dramatic question is, when you get to go home, however you like to phrase it. That's going to be by the, you know, middle of page 2 tops in a 10-minute play. I also have a blog post called, you know, Common Mistakes Found in 10-Minute Plays.
Great. Awesome.
One of the most common is that people don't get to the point of the play till page 5 or 6, because they sit down to write and they're like, da, 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 and somewhere around page 5 or 6, they figure out what the play is really about. And that's where their inciting incident ends up being. And then they don't lop off the first 3 pages and move it up and write the play from there. And so it just takes way too long for the play to get going, because they didn't edit once they figured out where the play was going.
Do you think that's because they don't follow the adage that you start the play as late or scene as late as you possibly can?
I mean, a lot of the problems in 10-minute plays are definitely the result of inexperience, or not paying attention, or not having someone read it. I still have Trade to Play Tuesday, which I don't know if you know about that, but every Tuesday for the past, I think it's like nine years now, maybe longer. On Tuesdays, it started because I had a 10-minute play that I wrote, and I'm on the Playwrights Binge, which is a email group. And I was like, hey, does anyone know?
Playwrights Bid?
Binge.
Binge. Okay, got it.
Yeah. And I just said, I wrote a 10-minute play. Does anyone have one they want to trade? And we'll give each other feedback. And I think like 17 people sent me their 10-minute plays. So I spent that whole day reading their 10-minute plays, giving feedback, and they all gave me feedback on mine. So as a result of that, I started Trade a Play Tuesday, where if on Tuesday you send me a 10-minute play, I will trade you with somebody else and you give each other feedback. And that's been going on, I think, since like 2014. So almost 10 years.
Is that something that anybody can join?
Yeah, anybody can do it. If you search Trade to Play Tuesday, the blog post on my blog will come up with all the instructions. It's very easy. You just send it. I swap you with somebody else. And it's great because we have so many places to do full length feedback, but like there was nowhere to get feedback on a 10-minute play. And so, yeah, and I think people should get feedback on 10-minute plays. But I think people were tending to write them and send them out without ever getting the kind of feedback they would get on a full length.
How does one give good feedback, and how does one give bad feedback?
I think good feedback stems from trying to understand what the play is that the playwright wants to write. What are they trying to write? I do a lot of feedback analysis. For pay, like people hire me to give them analysis. And I feel like by the time I read the play, I'm like, okay, I know what they want this play to be. I know what they're trying to do. And so I try to address all my feedback in that direction. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were trying to do this. And if your goal was to make this character X, then maybe this. I always try to find things that are good, that are strong, like where I feel like they're succeeding in their goal, where I feel like maybe they're falling away or why. I tend to also do line by line feedback, like just going through like page X, like because that way, as I'm going through, because what happens, I'm going to back up a minute. Like what happens a lot of times is people who give feedback and it's short and they'll say, this is not working. And when you go page by page, but then what happens is the playwright gets very defensive. What do you mean it's not working? Like, but When you go page by page and you're asking questions as you go, and I'll say, but this doesn't make sense because back here you said this. And then like another 5 pages later, it's like, this is another example of how this isn't, supporting this. And when you've gone through the whole play and I draw the conclusion at the end, the playwright can read, what ends up being anywhere from 3,000 to 7,000 words of feedback and see exactly where it started not working. As opposed to at the end, me just saying, this isn't working and you need to flesh out this character or whatever. You've seen the step-by-step progression and me reading it as if I were an audience member and just being like, that doesn't quite, does that make sense? So I think that is helpful if you can try and see it from that perspective. And the more you can give examples from the text that support whatever it is you're saying, that is also helpful. I find that people don't get defensive. They might not like it. They might say, you gave me a lot to think about, but they understand it, even if they don't like it.
All right. Do you teach workshops or anything like that, or?
I don't. I'm not really a teacher. I do one-on-one stuff. I will do any kind of one-on-one mentoring. I will do feedback, but like I did teach one class for the Guild, turning your 10-minute play into a full-length play. But I don't, one-on-one I think is far more my forte than teaching.
Sure. What is your involvement these days? I know it said since 2012. Are you still involved in the Dramatists Guild?
I'm currently the Western New York ambassador. So it's like, kind of a light position. It's not, I used to be a council member and I was the New York State regional rep. But now I just kind of have a light touch. I just recently did a webinar for them on how to use NPX, as a matter of fact. If you're a member, you can watch that video.
Do you think that that's at what stage should a playwright join the Guild?
I joined immediately. I wrote a play and I joined because I felt like I'm a playwright and a playwright should join the only professional organization for playwrights that exists, which is the Guild. So I think if you want to call yourself a playwright, you should belong to the Guild.
When we were talking earlier about regional or being successful in your town, and people on Broadway that have been in New York and they want this, and they're like, well, how is this person getting so many productions, and I'm over here, and what do you consider successful? Obviously, I understand what they consider successful.
I mean, I think we would all call that successful, but it's
right. Well, 100%, but I don't think you need to be. I mean,
I think everybody has to define their own success, because I think the most important thing to recognize is no matter how much talent you may or may not have, luck is a huge factor. I believe in, the cliches of the harder I work, the luckier I get, and being ready when luck happens, and all of those things. My definition of success that I always wanted to be working. I always wanted to have a reason to be working, and I always wanted to have something coming up that I could be looking forward to. And I've been lucky enough to have that for since that first production in 2010. I have always had another thing on the horizon. That's my definition of success. Everybody else is different, and it's different at different stages in your careers. And I think it's important to set goals that are both within your control and without your control. That doesn't work as an opposite, does it? Within your control and out of your control.
Yes, there you go.
And I have a blog post about that too, which basically I forget what year I wrote it, but it was about setting those types of goals and like what the goals can be that are going to help you achieve the bigger goals. And, while recognizing that luck is such a huge factor and positioning is a huge factor. And, I don't think I will ever get to Broadway barring some crazy, crazy thing that could happen, just because, positioning is really important. And I think it's important to recognize, what your position is and what you can achieve and what you can do to achieve the most you can achieve, if that makes sense. I have a whole interview series on my blog also with Plony, Playwrights Living Outside New York, some very successful people. And of all of the ones I interviewed, it's interesting because I interviewed them probably 10 years ago now. One of them was Larissa Fasthorse. Look where she has gone. That was crazy. And others are names you may not have heard of unless you really are well known, know playwrights. But that doesn't mean they're not successful. They're just more quietly successful. But they're always working. They've always got stuff happening.
Do you think that playwrights should produce their own work?
I think if you are going to produce your own work, you have to have a really clear vision of why you're doing it. If you're doing it because you think everyone's going to see my play and then it's going to be all over the place, that's probably not going to happen unless you produce it in New York and get a very good New York Times review. Or, plays happen in New York all the time and don't go anywhere after that, because if the right people don't see them and talk about them and it doesn't lead to a good review that will lead to, people, the other thing, this is tangential, but it connects. People I want to get my play published. When should I publish? Pay? How can I get my play published? And it's getting your play published does not get your play productions. There are so many plays in every catalog that the time to get your play published is when somebody will be looking for your play, and somebody will be looking for your play if they've read a review about your play in a place, like the New York Times. So if you have the money and you believe in your play and you want to put it up somewhere like 59 East 59th in New York, where it's going to get reviewed, and if it gets good reviews, you'll probably get a publication offer and maybe you will get some more productions. If you're going to do it in your own town, you're probably not going to get any traction beyond that production in your own town. But if you've never had a production and you're trying to own your hometown and you want people to know that you exist as a playwright and you want them to see your work and none of the theaters are giving you a chance, then just be realistic about why you're doing it and what you expect from it. And if it's just to see your show, that's okay too. But you just really have to know realistically what might come of it and what you want to come of it, and make sure that you set a budget and you stick to it, and take a good boot camp production class, and know what you're doing before. Because having self-produced the football play with someone else's money, it's a lot of work, and we had a pretty decent budget also. So just know, and that play never went anywhere after that one experience, and it was a great experience, but it was a very expensive experience, and I wouldn't have put that up myself for that price, so it's just, I think it's really important to know what you expect from it.
Right. Sure. There was somewhere I was going to go with that as well that you touched on. I'll ask you another question that I had in line when we were talking about your blog. Is because you've mentioned 3 or 4 articles specifically that are on your blog. Are those searchable? Like if you went to your blog post and like, oh, I want to know about feedback, and is there a search?
I have never written one about how to give feedback, but if it's blog.donnahoke.com, so if you go there, I have categorized them all.
Okay,
but if you were to search, Donna Hoke goal post, you would find that one, or Donna Hoke Tray to Play Tuesday, or Donna Hoke 10-minute play problems. They would come up.
But, okay, got it. Okay, so they are searchable. I do want to include, like I said, include the link for each one that we've done. That was where I was going with this, is like when you finish a draft, whether that's a 10-minute, maybe it's different for 10s than it is for your full lengths. What's your next step?
Well, for 10s, I do Trade to Play Tuesday, and I'll usually trade with 5 or 6 people. Whoever sends one that day, I'll just trade with all of them. Okay. But you could certainly you can do more than one trade a day as long as you complete one and then send it again, so that it's not like, with a full length play, the first thing I will do is invite people over for pizza and wine, just call some actors and say, whatever, we'll read it around my table. And then I redraft from that. And then I have a person that I send it to, he'll read it for like $40 Starbucks money. And then he'll give me feedback, and then I will revise from that. And then depending on if it's my turn in one of my 2 writers groups, I will put it in there and I will get their feedback. And then once I've done all of those revisions based on all of that, I will probably start sending it out for development opportunities.
How do you figure out, how do you discern which feedback you're going to use and what you're not?
Obviously if more than one person is saying the same thing, I try and give credence to that. Sometimes things just really make sense, like somebody will say something as, oh God, yeah, like it just really resonates with you. Right. I ask a lot of specific questions. Stephen Dietz, who was at Kenyon Playwrights Conference one year, he's got the 3 best questions. One of them is, what do you know to be true in this play? That's the first one. And people will start stating things, this and that, and you'll see if you're hitting the right themes that you want them to be coming back with, or if they think something is true that is absolutely not true, then you've made a big mistake. And I think that's a great question, because it just kind of gives you a mirror of what people heard when they read the play, and then it tells you if you're hitting what you wanted to hit. Then the next question is, if you could ask any character in this play a question, what would it be? And then you find out what they didn't get that they wanted to get that would help them have a better understanding of the play. And I love both of those questions because they don't invite prescription at all, but they also tell you what you're missing that is going to give people the most complete experience of the play you want to write, not the play they think you should be writing. And then the third thing he'll say is, complete this sentence, I can't believe nobody brought up X. And then that'll be, nobody mentioned that that person is saying those cringy things, or, whatever. Then you that's where more you get a little bit of a grab bag stuff. But I think those 3 questions are excellent.
So are these questions that you're asking the people that were listening to the reading? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the playwright actually asks those questions.
Yeah. If you have some kind of talk back, if it's a table read in my house, obviously, it's a little more free for all. But
sure.
If you're in a reading situation, or even in your writers groups, it helps to keep things focused on your play that you wrote and what they just heard, as opposed to what they think the play should be.
But even in a living room situation, those are still great ways to
start.
They're
fantastic.
Yeah. How long ago was that you
I stole those from him? Sure. I've passed them around so many places, and I always credit him, and I hope people credit him as it goes along. I think we were at the Kenyon conference in 2017, maybe.
Okay. I just because I had Stephen on it and it's been a while, so we may have covered that, and I may just have forgotten about them. And Stephen, please, if you're watching or listening, and you're like cursing me from behind in front of your screen, sitting there saying, "We covered this," and maybe I just need that refresher.
I'm
That's
sure
great.
he said so many brilliant things because he taught a
He
class
does.
at that. He taught a class at that Kenyon, and oh my gosh, I just wish I had it on recording because it was just so incredibly brilliant.
Yeah, he's got some amazing insight. And by the way, for those of you listening, we're talking about Kenyon College, not Kenyon the country in Africa, just in case anybody's confused. Though I think a writers' conference in Kenya would be phenomenal. What are you working on right now?
I have a couple adaptations that I'm working on. I have some pitches for screenplays that I'm working on that are due. And I have a one-woman show that I'm writing for an actor in town, just like a 40-minute thing that my daughter's going to direct in 2025.
Awesome. Good for her. Before I go on to the other question, because now you're just going, oh, you're doing an adaptation. So now I have to branch off to one other question before we go as well.
Sure.
So you're doing adaptations. How do you approach that? Or do you keep it? Are you specific to the story? Do you try to be as true as possible? How do you approach that? Or do you cut, or do you take your own creative license and your interpretation of what's there?
I've done 3 adaptations so far. The first one was a novella, and I stuck pretty close to the story, but just tried to figure out how can I put this on stage and have it be interesting.
Sure.
The next one I did was an adaptation of Little Women called Little Women Now. And that mostly was about how do I take those characters and put them in the 21st century.
Okay.
That's what that was about. You will recognize the moments, but they all look a little different. And it was
Sure.
more about like Amy takes a lot of selfies and she's very, social media obsessed, and because that's who Amy would be in
Sure.
in today's world. So it was that was more what the adaptation was. And the story follows pretty much, but you obviously have to condense a lot, and
Right.
I mean, it's very different, and that story is so episodic, so it's like, how do I give each of these girls a full arc and that kind of thing. The third one was Anne of Green Gables, and that was, I reset it in the 70s so that it could be updated a little, and it isn't quite so quaint, and it feels a little more modern, but there's still no technology. And that was more about how can I shore up the conflict? Because that is also a very episodic story that doesn't have a lot of conflict in it. Mm-hmm. And how can I, it was for YouthPLAYS, so it's got a huge ensemble. And how can I have the ensemble be part of this and be theatrical? I think each one is a little bit different. I haven't done anything yet where I've completely changed all the characters into other people, or changed the genders of characters. They've been mm-hmm. fairly true to the story. It's mostly about resetting the time and place and things like that.
You mentioned a number of characters and the ensemble and stuff, and getting in that. And I meant to ask this, and we don't have to go into great detail about it, but do you know how many characters you're going to have when you sit down to write a piece, or do you introduce them as you go?
I think I know.
Okay.
I think I know.
And then do you find yourself, I'll add one, or do you think, no, I can give this to another character and go from there?
No, I mean, here's how people will say, like, I was writing this play and suddenly this other character walked in. Like, I don't think that's how my brain works. Okay. Even when people say, like, the characters, they just said this, I find dialogue to very much be like free association in your own brain, as sure. opposed to I hear them talking. And so I have not ever found that, characters just walk into my play, though I have heard people describe it that way. I might think, oh, I need another character. I think my brain's more pragmatic than that. Sure. But I think I also am trying to, I often start with, my goal for this play is to write a 2-hander in real time. My goal for this play is to write a play with 5 women. I often try and set a goal of something I have never done before. And so that also comes into play sometimes.
Nice. Outside of the New Play Exchange, where can people find your work?
I have several plays published at YouthPLAYS. I have a play at TRW. I have 2 plays at Broadway Licensing with stage rights. I mean, everything's on the new Play Exchange that's not published. So
Sure.
I would say pretty much just there.
All right. And then are you on the socials?
I am on socials. I am Donna Hoke Plays at Instagram. I'm Donna Hoke on X. On Facebook, I'm Donna Hoke, and I also have a Donna Hoke Playwright page that is not super active. And I think I'm just Hoke Plays on Snapchat.
All right. Well, Donna Hoke, thanks for coming on the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you for having me on. This was fun.
No, I had a blast. Thank you. It was very insightful as always. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.